Ever wondered what Aussie slang used to sound like before No Worries and Mate took over? Buckle up. We're diving into 20 forgotten, hilarious and downright bizarre Aussie phrases that nobody says anymore, but definitely should. Sheila. Ever heard someone say Sheila and thought, wow, that sounds straight out of an old movie? You're not wrong. Sheila once rolled off Aussie tongues as the go-to word for a woman or girl. Cheerful, everyday and completely normal. It first popped up in the early 20th century, probably borrowed from the Irish name CLA, and it stuck around through the mid-century like a friendly echo of Aussie life. You'd hear blokes chatting about a nice Sheila down the road without a hint of irony. But times changed. By the 1980s, it started to sound dated, even a bit patronising. Modern Aussies ditched it, though the rest of the world still thinks we all say it. These days, Sheila lives on mostly in old TV shows, classic songs, and how foreigners imagine we talk. Still, it's a charming fossil from Australia's linguistic past. Struth. If there's one word that screams old-school Aussie, it's struth. You can almost hear it echoing from some dusty outback pub or a scene straight out of Crocodile Dundee. Short for God's truth, it was once a favourite exclamation of surprise, shock or disbelief. The kind of thing you'd blurt out after seeing a giant spider in your ute or a mate pulling off something unbelievable. It carried that rough around the edges charm typical of early Aussie slang. Blunt, funny and totally unpretentious. But fast forward to today and struth has mostly vanished from daily speech. Maybe you'll still catch it in the bush or from your granddad after a good yarn. But city Aussies? Not a chance. Still, there's something wonderfully expressive about it. A single word that sums up amazement, frustration and humour all at once. Struth, indeed. Blimey. Here's one that might make you raise an eyebrow. Blimey? It's the kind of word that instantly feels like something your great-granddad might have said while shaking his head at a shocking sight. Originally borrowed from British slang, blimey was used across Australia to express surprise, alarm or excitement, the verbal equivalent of dropping your cuppa in shock. You'd hear it shouted after a near miss on the cricket field or when spotting a rogue kangaroo hopping across the road. Nowadays, it's all but extinct in Aussie conversation. City folk barely ever use it, and even in the bush, it feels quaint and old-fashioned. But there's a charm to it, a comic exaggeration that makes even mundane surprises sound dramatic. Hearing someone exclaim, "Blimey," today is like a little portal into Australia's past. Colourful, cheeky, and undeniably memorable. Stone the flaming crows. If you've ever watched Home and Away, you might think Aussies casually exclaim, "Stone the flaming crows" every day. Let me assure you, that's a myth. This colourful phrase was once a go-to for expressing surprise or annoyance. Think of it as the Australian equivalent of crikey with an extra punch. Its roots trace back to early 20th century slang, with stone emphasising shock and crows, adding a touch of rural flair. Blokes in pubs or farmers on the field would sometimes drop it when confronted with something unexpected or irritating. Today, forget it. Even the most die-hard bushy would raise an eyebrow. Still, it has a certain comedic charm, especially when you imagine it delivered with Alf Stewart's deadpan seriousness. It's one of those phrases that lives forever in TV, nostalgia and the imagination. Just don't expect to hear it in modern Aussie chatter. Flaming gala. Let's dive into another classic Aussie insult, the flaming gala. If you grew up watching Home and Away, Alf Stewart probably comes to mind immediately, wagging his finger at some hapless character. The term originally described a fool or idiot, inspired by the bright pink and grey gala parrot, flashy, loud, and often behaving in a silly way. Aussies loved it for its mix of humour and sting, perfect for calling out someone being hopeless without getting too serious. Back in the day, it would roll off tongues on the street, at pubs, or over backyard barbies. Nowadays, you're more likely to hear it from cranky older men muttering at teenagers than in casual conversation. Still, it carries that uniquely Australian wit, playful, slightly rude, and entirely visual. So next time you want to imagine an old-school Aussie scolding someone, picture a flaming gala flapping about in full colour. Shrimp on the barbie. Here's one that's probably more famous overseas than in Australia. Shrimp on the barbie. Thanks to tourism campaigns and movies, many non-Australians still picture us casually grilling shrimp in the backyard. The reality? We don't say shrimp, we say prawns. And we don't toss them around as often as Hollywood would like you to believe. It's one of those phrases that lives entirely in stereotype, a relic of international imagination rather than everyday Aussie life. Back in the day, the phrase wasn't really used at all. Today, hearing it from a local would probably earn a confused look or a chuckle. Still, it's fun to imagine. Shrimp on the barbie has become shorthand for everything foreigners think Australia is: sunny, laid back, and slightly overcooked in cliches. A classic example of how a phrase can be iconic without ever being real. I'm not here to fuck spiders. Here's a phrase that makes you stop and blink. I'm not here to fuck spiders. It sounds outrageous, and that's kind of the point. Essentially, it means I'm not here to mess around, or let's get serious. Despite its vivid imagery, it's surprisingly rare. Most Aussies will look at you blankly if you drop it in conversation. I first heard it at BuzzFeed a few years back, and honestly, it caught me completely off guard. The phrase conjures a certain Aussie bluntness, colourful, unapologetic, and straight to the point. Back in the day, maybe it popped up more in the workplace or around mates when someone wanted to cut through nonsense. Today, though, it's mostly a cheeky relic, something you stumble upon in blogs or lists of quirky Aussie sayings. Still, it's a perfect reminder of the country's playful, irreverent side. Stop carrying on like a two-bob watch. Here's one that will leave most modern Aussies scratching their heads. Stop carrying on like a two-bob watch. The phrase harks back to the days when a bob was a shilling, and a two-bob watch was a cheap, unreliable timepiece that would act up at the worst moments. Calling someone a two-bob watch basically meant they were fussing, whining, or behaving unpredictably, a colourful way to tell someone to get a grip. Back in the day, it was commonly thrown around in workplaces, pubs, or households when someone was overreacting. Today, you'd be hard-pressed to hear it outside a history lesson or your grandparents' old stories. Still, it has that delightful Aussie blend of humour and sharpness, vivid, slightly archaic, and perfectly expressive. Using it now might make you sound like a time-travelling bushie from the past, and honestly, that's half the fun. Crikey. Few words are as instantly recognisable abroad as crikey. Thanks to the late, great Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, it's become a global symbol of Australian surprise. Every time he spotted a croc or got a bit too close to a snake, crikey would echo through the footage, dramatic and unforgettable. But here's the twist. In modern Australia, it's hardly ever used in casual conversation. Sure, you might still hear it in the outback or from older generations, but city Aussies rarely utter it outside of a nostalgic joke. Originally, crikey was simply a minced oath, a polite way to express shock or astonishment without swearing. It captures that uniquely Aussie mix of humour, understatement, and colourful language. Even if it's mostly retired, hearing it instantly transports you back to a time when Australia's wildness seemed just a little closer, and a lot more exciting. She'll be apples. Here's one that's almost entirely vanished from Aussie conversation. She'll be apples. Once a cheerful way to say everything will be fine, it's basically the longer, older cousin of she'll be right. In the early to mid-20th century, you might have heard it tossed around in kitchens, pubs, or out in the bush whenever someone wanted to reassure a mate that no drama would last long. Today, almost no one says the full phrase. everyone just shortens it to the much more common "she'll be right," which rolls off the tongue faster and fits modern casual speech. But "she'll be apples" has a certain charm, evoking a slower, sunnier Australia, where language was a little more playful and colourful. Using it now would make you sound like a historian or a time-travelling bushie, in the best possible way. It's one of those gems that reminds us how lively Aussie slang once was. Dry as a dead dingo's donga. Now here's a phrase that's about as Aussie as it gets, and just as extinct. Dry as a dead dingo's donga was once a colourful way of saying you were absolutely parched, or that the land itself was bone dry. It's the kind of saying you can imagine coming out of a weathered bloke at a dusty outback pub, beer in hand, and sunburn on his nose. These days, though, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone brave enough to say it out loud, especially in polite company. The imagery alone is, uniquely Australian. But you've got to admire the creativity. It's vivid, funny, and perfectly captures that no-nonsense bush humour we're famous for. So while it might not belong in everyday chatter anymore, it's one of those expressions that deserves a quiet nod of respect, even if it makes you wince. Aussie salute. Let's talk about a classic piece of Aussie body language, the Aussie salute. It's that iconic wave of the hand and arm used to swat flies away from your face, usually performed mid-barbie, on the farm, or anywhere the relentless bush flies attack. Despite its fame in photos and videos of rugged Aussies, the phrase itself is rarely spoken aloud. People just do it instinctively. I have to admit, the first time I heard it, I assumed it meant something else entirely, which tells you a lot about how little the term is actually used in everyday conversation. Still, it perfectly captures a slice of Australian life. Practical, unpretentious, and a little bit humorous. The Aussie salute may not feature in modern slang lists, but it remains an unspoken emblem of our outdoorsy, fly-fighting spirit. Fair dinkum. Here's a phrase that many foreigners still think Australians throw around constantly. Fair dinkum. Technically, it's still alive. It means something is genuine, honest, or unquestionably good. Back in the day, you could hear it everywhere, at the pub, on the farm, or during a chat at the local footy club. It was a way to emphasise truth, sincerity, or authenticity. These days, though, city Aussies rarely use it. You're more likely to hear it from older generations or in rural communities where tradition sticks. Drop it casually in a Sydney cafe, and you might get a few raised eyebrows. That said, the phrase still carries that unmistakable Aussie charm. Straightforward, colourful and honest. So while fair dinkum isn't part of daily urban chatter anymore, it remains a proud marker of Australian identity and a reminder of how we once emphasised authenticity in every word we spoke. Huru. Here's a farewell that's as charming as it is distinctly Aussie. Once a cheerful way to say goodbye, it's playful, friendly, and rolls off the tongue in a way that only Australians seem to manage naturally. Back in the day, you might have heard it at the railway station, the pub, or waving to mates at the footy. It had warmth, character, and that unmistakable sense of local identity. Nowadays, it's almost completely disappeared from everyday use. Say huru to someone in the city today, and they might stare at you blankly or think you're joking. That said, it's hard not to love it. The word is short, snappy, and infinitely more fun than the standard goodbye. Huru may have faded from modern slang, but its nostalgic charm remains. It's a tiny, delightful reminder of a friendlier, simpler Aussie way of signing off. G'day. Let's kick things off with the greeting that everyone thinks we Aussies use constantly. G'day. It's practically the shorthand for Australian friendliness in movies, postcards, and stereotypes worldwide. Technically, it's still a thing, a casual way to say good day or hello. But in reality, it's not quite as common as the world assumes. City folks especially don't throw it around every time they meet someone. Back when I worked in retail, management insisted we answer the phone with a cheerful "G'day," Welcome to store name. That's about the closest I've seen it used in modern professional life. Outside of stage scenarios, it's now more of a nostalgic nod to classic Aussie culture rather than everyday speech. Still, G'day has charm. It's friendly, iconic, and unmistakably Aussie. Using it today may feel a little retro, but it's a reminder of the cheerful, laid-back spirit that Australians are famous for. Carry on like a pork chop. Here's one that instantly paints a picture. Carry on like a pork chop. This delightfully silly phrase was used to describe someone acting ridiculous, overreacting, or making a fuss over nothing. The imagery comes from the spluttering, sizzling noise a pork chop makes on the barbecue. Chaotic, noisy, and impossible to ignore. You can almost hear it every time someone used it. It has a very Kath and Kim vibe, the kind of phrase that felt at home in suburban kitchens, at backyard barbies, or around family gatherings in the 80s and 90s. Today, however, it's rarely heard outside old-school conversations or nostalgic TV reruns. Modern Aussies usually stick to simpler expressions for over-the-top behaviour, leaving this gem to linger in memory. Still, carry on like a pork chop perfectly captures the humour, playfulness, and uniquely Australian knack for turning everyday observations into colourful language. It deserves a second look, even if it's retired. Mad as a cut snake. Let's dive into a phrase that's all drama and imagery. Mad as a cut snake. This classic Aussie slang was used to describe someone who was furious, out of control, or completely unhinged. The picture it paints is vivid. A snake that's been cut or provoked, writhing unpredictably and ready to strike. You can almost feel the tension every time it was used. It has that very Kath and Kim suburban Aussie charm, likely popular in the 80s and 90s among parents' generation, during backyard arguments, pub banter, or family feuds. Today, though, it's mostly retired, replaced by simpler ways of saying someone's angry. Drop it in modern conversation, and you might get a confused stare or a chuckle. Yet mad as a cut snake perfectly showcases the playful, colourful exaggeration that Australians once loved. It's a reminder of the dramatic flair we could pack into even the simplest descriptions. Bonza. Here's a word that sounds as cheerful as it is old school. Back in the 20th century, Australians would use it to describe something excellent, impressive, or well done. If your mate cooked a top-notch snag on the barbie, built a sturdy shed, or told a cracking story, you might hear a satisfied bonza echo across the backyard. It's the kind of word that perfectly captured the upbeat, laid-back, and proudly Aussie attitude of the era. Bright, fun, and unpretentious, it was short, snappy, and full of positive energy. These days, however, bonza has largely vanished from everyday conversation. Modern slang prefers simpler compliments, leaving this gem to linger in history books, vintage TV shows, or cheeky throwbacks from older Aussie. Still, it's a delightful reminder of a time when even ordinary things could be celebrated with flair and a smile. Let's take a look at a phrase that once captured the Aussie sense of fairness. Fair shake of the sauce bottle. This quirky expression was used to ask for a fair go or a break, usually when someone felt treated unjustly. Imagine standing in the hot sun at the footy, arguing over who gets the last snag on the barbie, and throwing up a "come on, fair shake of the sauce bottle." It's funny, visual, and unmistakably Australian. Former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd even used it, giving the phrase a short-lived revival in politics. But despite that high-profile endorsement, it didn't stick around. City dwellers rarely say it today, and younger Aussies are more likely to stick with plain "give me a break" or "fair go." Still, fair shake of the sauce bottle is a charming relic of Aussie humour, language, and identity. The kind of playful expression that deserves a nod, even if it's retired. Here's a phrase that's cheeky, colourful, and very Aussie. Don't come the raw prawn with me. It's used to call someone out when they're trying to deceive you, stretch the truth, or misrepresent a situation. Picture it. A mate tells a tall tale about catching a monster fish, and you lean in and say, don't come the raw prawn with me. It's clever, visual, and instantly gets the point across. While one person admitted, "I still say it all the time, but it's not as popular." Most modern Aussies rarely use it. You're more likely to hear a simple, "Don't lie to me," or "Give me a break." Still, this quirky idiom captures that dry, playful, and slightly sarcastic wit that Australians are famous for. Even if it's fallen out of everyday conversation, it remains a brilliant piece of our linguistic heritage, worthy of a comeback. And that's a wrap on our trip down Aussie slang memory lane. Which one made you laugh, cringe, or just go, "What on earth?" Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more quirky pieces of Australian history and language. Catch you next time.